Well, we're in New York City for about 24 hours, maybe 36. Just got done with about 3 days in the Bay Area. Had a very good time out there. Got a lot done. And now we're taking care of a few things here in New York City. It's, I guess you could say, cold and rainy. It's in the 40s, which is not really that cold since we're from the Midwest. It's a little bit on the rainy and gloomy side here in the big city. We got a Ford Expedition as our rental, and it's a 2021. It's the Max, and I think it's the limited trim level. And it's an interesting comparison or contrast with the Suburban we just drove, which was the top of the line 2022. This is the top of the line 2021. And there are some obvious differences that sort of jump out at you before you even start driving. And the first is that if you see it, the controls are just a little more logical and simpler to understand and read and use, and better laid out. Your audio controls, for instance, on the steering wheel, volume up, volume down, skip forward, skip backward, one track. These are sort of secondary buttons that can deal with your phone. Your cruise control is all here, very straightforward. This we actually haven't had it on the highway, so we haven't had a chance to use cruise control and the adaptive and lane keeping, lane centering, which it may or may not have. It's not entirely clear. The center screen, I think, is only 8 inches. It's not nearly as big as the GM, and it's not as big as the 2021 F-150 or 2022 Super Duty, which have up to a 12-inch screen available. Could be that in 2022 the Expedition has the larger one available as well. You've got to get it as an upgrade. You can only get it with like the XLT, I think 302A and above. A lot of them have this size of a screen, at least in the F-150 and the Super Duty. Climate controls, very straightforward. You get your temp dial. You pretty much, most people just hit auto and leave it on auto. Heated steering wheel, heated seats with 3 settings. You can manually control your fan speed up, down, and it says on the screen what are the changes that you're making. But again, most people just put it on auto, and it's got this fan limit, and you might say, what is that about? And what it means is that when you turn on auto, sometimes in a lot of cars when you get into them, it's either cold or really hot outside. The fan will just come on at full blast, and if you want to turn it down, you have to take it off auto. But what Ford has realized is that people probably want to leave the climate control on auto most of the time, and maybe they just want to limit how much of a blast they get when it first comes on, and they set it to like medium for the fan limit. And all that means is that that's the hardest it's going to blow, and if it doesn't need to, it'll be on the low setting. And if it needs to cool you off in a hurry or heat you up in a hurry, yeah, it'll go up to medium. But if you don't want it to go on full blast, you can actually set an upper limit to the fan speed when it's in auto mode. And that's just one of those smart details that Ford took the time to figure out, and GM really hasn't. You've got your pictures if you want to take it off auto and you want to just do dashboard only. You want to do dashboard and the floor, or the floor only, or the floor and defrost, all that type of thing. Again, you can manually set the fan speed, and that goes all the way from 1 to 7, just like in the F-150. Or you could just put it on auto and maybe set it at low. Turn off the rear defrost. And turn the temp down. I guess it goes to high when you put it on max defrost. It's obviously got separate dials for the passenger and the driver. Your audio control is very straightforward. You actually have a volume knob and you have a tuning knob. You got your track buttons, forward, backward, pause. I think that actually turns off the screen if I'm not mistaken, yeah. So you can decide how much activity you want on that screen, or if you just want it off completely. And again, very smart little detail. You got presets for those who still listen to the radio. And then up here you've got a line of buttons as well. Your blinkers. What's that there? That one doesn't say. Obviously your blinker is pretty straightforward. I think that disables and enables your auto stop start. Traction control on and off. And then hill descent control. Either off or ready. And for ready, that just means it's gonna slow you down when you're going down hills. Okay, it says it does have lane keeping, and so we'll see how that works when we get back on the highway and turn on the cruise. We were not impressed with the lane keeping on the Suburban. Really, all it does is keep you from going completely out of your lane. So, you know, if you're a distracted driver, it'll keep you from going into the next lane and crashing into somebody, potentially avoiding a head-on collision. That's great, but if you're a conscientious driver and you pay attention, it doesn't do you any good. And it does not do what lane centering does, which is actually take over the steering and essentially drive the truck for you. So all that lane keeping does is keep you from going completely out of the lane. But if you're going to rely on it then and not pay attention to the road, then you're going to be kind of drifting all over the lane like you're drunk or something, and waiting until lane keeping intervenes, and then it's going to kind of bounce you in the other direction and do that type of thing until you get pulled over for weaving. So anyhow, again, the controls are very, very straightforward and well laid out. Mirrors, your lock, obviously, your settings for your power seats. It has 3 of them, and everything you touch feels very high quality. The leather, it feels much, much better than the GM leather, which we said it sort of almost feels like a combination of leather and cardboard. It's kind of slick and, you know, really not well textured, not it doesn't have any give to it, not supple in the least. The seats feel a lot better in this Expedition. The shifter, you know, as stated before, we're not a fan of these sort of gimmicky knob style shifters. It's a dial. Half the reason they went to this is because it's 1,000 times cheaper than actually making a shifter lever with all those moving parts and components and linkages. Even if it's not directly linked to the transmission, you know, it's a lot more complex of a control. And this thing probably costs $10 to make, maybe $5. It's just a dial. And then you can put it in a manual mode once you're in drive. And then these are your shifting buttons for up and down. You know, as we said before, we prefer a shifter lever that you can just operate by feel and you don't have to look at. And this one, technically, you can operate it by feel because you'd be like, well, I'm in park, so I'll turn it, you know, 3 settings over to drive. But it's very easy to forget, you know, how many things to the left and right you went, and then you accidentally leave it in reverse and you go to get out of the vehicle, and either it takes off on you or maybe it's smart enough to know to put itself into park. But again, the shifter on a truck or a large SUV is meant to be a column shifter. That's just the way God intended. You got your drive mode control, and really that does, it starts in normal, it goes to eco, sport, tow haul, and then mud and ruts, and I think that turns on your 4-wheel drive. No, it puts it in a 4 auto, turns off traction. Sand, I'm not sure what that does. It might put it in a 4 low, hard to say. Grass, gravel, and snow. That just made a change. That, I don't know what the change was. But really, 99% of the time, all you need to do is leave it in normal mode, and it can figure out what it's going to do. It has the option of either 2 high or 4 auto. It does not allow you to put it into 4 high or 4 low, and I suspect that's because Ford, knowing its customer base as well as it does, and there are very few companies that are better tuned into their customers than Ford. I think Ford knows that a lot of soccer moms or soccer dads are going to just leave it in 4 high and end up damaging or destroying the transfer case when it gets onto dry pavement. Or maybe they'll do the same with 4 low. Very easy to damage your drive line when you get on a dry pavement and the center differential is locked. So 4 auto, for the vast majority of customers, that's probably all they ever need to do. Just put in a 4 auto and forget about it. We talked about that once, where when you're on a highway and it's slick and it's slippery, and you've got it in 4 auto, and maybe you're going around a long sweeping curve at 40, 45 miles an hour, if you hit a patch of ice and you're in 4 auto, what's going to happen is the rear wheels are going to start slipping, and that's going to be the signal to the vehicle to lock up that transfer case and put you into 4 high. But by the time it makes that decision, you might already be halfway sideways. Again, at highway speeds going through a long sweeping curve. By the time you break traction long enough for the system to decide to put you into 4 high, you might already be sideways and might be having to do a drastic course correction. Ask us how we know that. Anyway, again, the interior of the vehicle, you can't see it too well because it's dark out. Everywhere you look, it's high quality, it's well thought out. Even the stitching on the dashboard, which is real. Even if it was fake, the whole thing still looks and feels very, very impressive. And like they spent a lot of time sweating the details in the way that General Motors did not. Again, the console, like we said, the console in the Suburban is maybe 5-6 inches deep. This thing is at least a foot deep, and you can fill it right up with stuff. It's got a 12-volt outlet in there. You can put hanging folders in there, hanging file folders, for those of you who live out of your vehicle, or maybe it's your mobile office. Again, everything about this vehicle is just exquisitely thought out and organized and executed. In the Suburban, we talked yesterday and the day before about the powertrain and how we weren't really that impressed with the V8 in that thing, because it just didn't give you the impression that it likes to work. And we compared it to the F-150 with that EcoBoost, or the hybrid, the Power Boost system, which is just an EcoBoost coupled with a 50 horsepower electric motor. And the EcoBoost loves to run hard, and it loves to make power, and it doesn't hesitate for a minute. You think a small turbocharged engine, well, it's going to have a ton of turbo lag. Well, the EcoBoost most definitely does not. It gets right up, and it will go at as fast as you need it to, with practically no hesitation at all. We're out here on the west side of the city. That's the, you can't see it too well, but I think that's the USS Intrepid, maybe, or Enterprise. I can't remember. It's an aircraft carrier that's been decommissioned. You can't really see it, but it's there. Trust me. The Circle Line is over there, and that's like a boat tour you can take that goes around Manhattan Island. It's about an hour or two, maybe 2 hours long. It's really, really neat. You can see almost the entire city. Well, the landmarks at least. Statue of Liberty, World Trade Center, Empire State Building, New York Harbor, all that. It's a really, really neat tour. And each tour guide or narrator has their own take on things. And they're real characters. If you've never been to New York City, or if you've only been a couple times, you definitely need to do that. And check out the Circle Line. You'll really enjoy it. At least if it's between about April and September, October. After that, it gets a little chilly and you're sort of stuck inside. You want to go during a time when you can actually be outside on like that on that front deck there. The dashboard on the Expedition and the gauges are logically laid out and easy to read and understand, which is a night and day difference from the Suburban. Suburban is 100% digital, and it's just an absolute mess. You got to struggle to find the needle for the tachometer. It's this teeny tiny little thing, and there's all this other crap around the dial that's, you know, just a bunch of junk and bells and whistles and readouts that really don't tell you anything you need to know. And it just looks so fake. It looks like a video game dashboard. This thing, you got your tach needle, and if you can see it, it's the gear indicator, and this is a 10-speed. And then your speedometer. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And then in between it, you got a nice big digital information center with your minor gauges, which again are all easy to understand and read. And if you go back and look at the video we did of the Suburban, it is just an absolute disaster ergonomically, at least the digital version. And Ford has a digital version as well. And we do not prefer digital gauges, but the one that Ford has for like the Lariat F-150 and above, very, very well done. So something you're going to notice if you go to New York City, there is massive amounts of vacant commercial real estate, specifically retail. And the city in a lot of ways emptied out during the pandemic. I mean, just completely emptied out. People sat in their apartments for a couple of months, their tiny little apartments, you know, their little one bedroom or studio that they're paying $2,500 for. And I think they did that for the spring and half of the summer of 2020. And then I think at some point they were like, why the hell am I here when I could be out in the country or back at home with the folks, with the in-laws or the parents, in a house that's like 5 times as big. And when everybody's jobs went remote, there was no reason why you had to be in the city. Very large NYPD presence. I think the president was here today. And they had a funeral either yesterday or today for one of the officers who was killed in Harlem about a week or two ago. Very sad situation. There were 30 police officers either shot or killed in January this year. It's ridiculous. We're going down 42nd Street, and you know, they still got CVS in your pharmacies, although a lot of those are closing up and leaving because folks can go in there and shoplift and take as much stuff as they want. I think up to $950, and they won't get prosecuted. So they just go in and they have a little scanner or calculator and they calculate up to $950, and then they just take it and walk out. Maybe sell it on Amazon or something. You're always going to have wine and liquor stores. That'll be the last thing that ever leaves. But again, this is 42nd Street, one of the most prominent parts of the biggest and loudest and you might say most vibrant cities in the country. And a massive amount of retail is vacant. Partly because of the pandemic. Partly because I know there was a lot of crime, a lot of looting and vandalism that summer. A lot of restaurants shut down. And again, that's pretty tragic too. Restaurants that have been there for generations. When the city locked down, and even when it opened back up, there were so many restrictions on the restaurants that a lot of them just went away. We're coming up on it. You may or may not be able to see it. The Grand Hyatt at Grand Central. Massive hotel. Completely shuttered. Gone. Never to reopen, at least anytime soon. So again, a real sad thing to see happen to a great city. And we'll see if it comes back. We lived here in the 70s and 80s, and it was a disaster back then. They made a movie called Escape from New York, which had this fictitious premise that pretty much everybody who could leave New York City had left, and it had been converted into a prison. And they built a wall around it and just put all the federal prisoners in the country in it. And a lot of people thought, you know what, that's not the That's almost halfway plausible, because everybody, many people were fleeing New York City in the 70s and 80s because, once again, crime was out of control. Completely out of control. You had to put a sign on your window that said "No radio, already stolen." Or you had to get one of those removable radios you could pull out. Passing through Times Square area. Passing through the theater district. And you see a lot of lights, but if you look closely, a great many of these theaters and like the New York gift shop, closed, out of business, because tourism, to a great extent, tourism dropped off. Almost completely. A couple other things to say about the Expedition, and we can cut it short. If you are considering either the Expedition or the Suburban, we recommend the Expedition highly because of the powertrain, because of the interior and the quality and the logical way the interior is laid out. Look at that, an entire theater vacant, up for lease. Times Square is just off to the left. I think that's vacant too. Again, the interior, in our opinion, it's 1,000 times nicer than the Suburban. But you might want to wait until you can get the 12-inch screen in the Expedition. If a big center screen is your thing. When you can get Sync 4 and the 12-inch screen, you might want to wait until that's available. And it may be available starting in 2022. I'm just not sure. We'll have to check the background on that. But the Sync on this version, the 2021, with the 8-inch screen or 9-inch screen, it is not wireless. And so you have to have your phone plugged into the... yeah, there's Times Square right there. You have to have your phone plugged into the vehicle, and that may or may not be of concern to you. But some people like to pass their phone, from the front seat to the back seat, and so on and so forth, and not have to have it plugged in at all times. And if you're that kind of person, yeah, maybe you'll want to wait. These lobbies are amazing in some cases. It's like a 3-story lobby, marble, and a lot of them have waterfalls. But look at all that, if you can see it, completely vacant. Almost an entire city block vacant real estate. It's really unfortunate. I think that's what, Bryant Park there? Can't remember. So yeah, in terms of the interior, the Expedition is a lot nicer, with that caveat that if you can hold out, you might want to hold out long enough to get the Sync 4 with the 12-inch screen. In terms of the powertrain, there's just no comparison. The EcoBoost, and we've never been a fan of small turbocharged, high-pressure turbocharged engines. This thing has a ton of technology. It's got, first of all, it's not overhead valve, it's an overhead cam, so it's actually got 4 cams, variable valve timing, 24 valves, 2 turbochargers, 2 intercoolers, obviously, direct fuel injection, and I think the newer ones have direct and port injection. This may or may not have gotten the newest generation of the 3.5, but for 2021, Ford upgraded the 3.5 to include direct and port injection. I think a lot of that was because the intake valves weren't getting any lubrication from the fuel, because it was all being injected directly into the combustion chamber. So I think they went back to, they went to a combination of direct and port injection. But that's a huge amount of technology, a lot of stuff to go wrong. And And again, a turbocharged engine with a lot of boost. It's just inherently prone to failure. And yet, now that the EcoBoost is in at least its third generation, you know, the issue with the cam phasers seems to have been worked out. That's what a lot of people are saying. The issue with turbochargers failing seems to have been worked out. It doesn't appear that head gaskets are an issue, even in a small V6 with a lot of boost coming out of the turbos. And so Ford has confounded the critics, including ourselves, and they have gained widespread acceptance in what you might consider a very conservative, very traditional customer base, which is pickup truck buyers. And that's just the answer. I mean, I would not be surprised if Ford discontinues the 5-liter V8 altogether as an option in the F-150. So you got Grand Central here, I think, on the left. Yeah, that's Grand Central, which they completely renovated about 25, 30 years ago. Very, very well done. And that is the Hyatt, which we were telling you about. The Grand Hyatt. Closed. Amazing. And now we're on Lexington Ave. This is the Chrysler Building here. And not only is the Hyatt shut down, along with its ground floor retail, but the ground floor retail at the Chrysler Building is shut down. Again, the Chrysler Building, one of the iconic buildings in the New York City skyline. It looks like it's been converted into an Amazon Go, if you know what that is. You see that little lettering there. And you just hate to see it, but that's the sign of the times. It's a combination of the pandemic, a lot of crime, and consumer behavior in general, just shifting away from shopping in person to shopping online. And those three trends have just decimated the New York City retail landscape. I'm gonna go up 2nd Avenue here. What else? Again, can't say enough about the powertrain on this thing. I mean, it loves to run. And this is a very heavy vehicle. It's probably 6,000 pounds, if not more. You load it full of passengers, of which it can hold a total of 8. 2 in the front, 3 in the middle, 3 in the third row. All of which have huge amounts of room. You put 8 people in here, that's another, call it 1,000 pounds plus, just of people. You add cargo. And so you're pushing 7,000 pounds fully loaded with a full fuel tank. And once again, this Expedition has no issues gaining and maintaining whatever speed you desire. It just loves to rev. You don't have to get deep into the throttle. It's got tremendous amounts of low and mid-range torque. You never, ever, ever have to floor it and just sit there thinking, why is this thing not making power? When's it going to start? Generating some thrust. No, it's a great, great engine. Now, it doesn't actually save you a ton of gas. And people are so disappointed when they get their EcoBoost and they wind up getting 16, 18 miles to the gallon, maybe 14 in the city. And they say, oh, I've been cheated, I've been robbed. What's wrong with my EcoBoost? And don't be deceived. It's not going to save you gas because it's still attached to a 6,000 pound vehicle. And so it can't completely break the laws of physics, but what it will do is generate massive amounts of mid-range torque and move this vehicle effortlessly in the city, on the highway. Makes it an absolute pleasure to drive. And so for those two reasons, the powertrain and the interior, Those two reasons alone are worth getting the Expedition over the Suburban. Again, we talked about attention to detail. Everywhere you look, you can tell they put huge amounts of effort into refinement and development of the tiniest details that make it just a pleasure to live with. The exterior, in our opinion, not that impressive. It actually looks kind of boring. And so does the Suburban. So to be honest, that's kind of a wash. I think that's the original S&W Steakhouse, if I'm not mistaken. May or may not be. Been there a long time. Exceptionally good. It's got an aluminum body, as does the F-150. It got that in, 2018 when it was redesigned. Completely redesigned for the first time ever since its introduction in 97. So the original body style lasted a full 20 years, which is extraordinary. And we really liked the way the Expedition looked, the original Expedition, which first came out in 97 and then was facelifted in 03 and again in maybe 06, 07 timeframe when the EL came out. And then again in 2015 when they switched over from the 5.4 to the EcoBoost. It was still the original body style from 97 with minor tweaks. Obviously the interior had been redone a couple times. But, in the dark, you could not tell it apart, really. The 2015, 16, 17 from that same truck 20 years prior. And so in 2018, it got its first complete refresh. Let's go up to Park Ave. And that's when it switched from a steel body to an aluminum body. And if you live in the Midwest, as we do, that's a big, big deal. Obviously, it costs more to insure it because it costs a lot more to do body work on it, because not a lot of shops are qualified to do body work on aluminum vehicles. It's a completely different process. It's a very hard material to work with. It tends to stretch, tends to tear easier, but the fact that it's so much lighter than steel and the fact that it doesn't rust like steel, it's almost life-changing. Again, if you live in the Midwest. We've got an Expedition that's an 04, coming up on 20 years old, and it's got so much rust that it's, we're about to have to get rid of it because it's about to disintegrate into a heap of rusted metal, and it's tragic because the Powertrain's still going strong at almost 20 years and 250,000 miles. But the aluminum body, huge game changer. I mean, this thing could last 25 years in the Midwest and not fall apart. So in any case, don't want to keep you any longer, but going straight from a Suburban, driving that thing for 3 days to driving an Expedition, it's a night and day difference. The way it gets down the road, it feels like the wheelbase in this thing is 2 feet longer. It's just so much more stable and composed. It's not tippy. It doesn't feel like you're getting pitched back and forth. It's probably not any wider than the Suburban, but it feels better planted than the Suburban. The Suburban just feels like it's kind of tipping all over the place and you're just kind of getting tossed around. And this thing feels 1,000 times more composed. We were talking about yesterday, and it might have sounded confusing. Let's go up 57th here. But we were saying our old 2007 Suburban feels better to drive than the new 2022, which is 15 years newer. And that's because the old Suburban felt longer, felt wider, and it felt shorter in terms of height, lower to the ground. And the new Suburban feels shorter in terms of length and narrower and taller in terms of height. And so you just don't have that planted and stable and rock solid feeling you get with something like the older Suburban. Or with this thing, with the Expedition. We'll go up Park Avenue for a little bit. And so once again, just the way it drives, in terms of powertrain and in terms of handling and stability, it's night and day difference from the Suburban, the new Suburban, to the Expedition. 59th Street. All right, I think that's all for now. Hope y'all are having a good week. It's been a pretty good one for us, pretty busy, but we're getting a lot done, and having a lot of fun comparing these vehicles. All right, we'll talk to you later. Have a good one.